Hello.
Hello everyone, I'm the Game Beaver and welcome back to another Little Nightmares theory video. There's been some new information come to light, so I've had to make a theory video a little bit earlier than I actually expected. All I can say is that after this video, you may never view the game, and for that matter, more importantly, the lady the same way again. So before we get into the meat and bones of this entire video, I just want to clear up a few things. I've seen a lot of comments about the lady, saying she isn't a geisha. And that me quoting her as a geisha could be wrong. You're probably right about that. And rather a hostess, which is very true. Her attire is very turned down as far as traditional geisha dress goes. Typically very vibrant in color and patterns. But it's not impossible for our quote-unquote hostess to have been a geisha in the past. If a geisha marries, she retires from her profession. But if she doesn't, it's quite common for them to teach and train younger geishas, or become a teacher of music, and even become a restaurant owner. Exactly what we see her doing in the mall. Now, if you actually save some of the early images from Little Nightmares, the actual title of the file contains governess. So maybe she's not even a hostess, she's a governess. But what could this mean? Typically, a governess is employed to teach children, and this fits in with her possible geisha past also. Maybe this is what she retired to. And this may also be the reason as to why we have children even here in the first place. The School of Hard Knocks has got nothing on this place. But for the sake of argument, let's just call it the lady. So, let's get right into it, shall we? I know, be prepared guys. I'm going to try to explain as best I can, using all the evidence I have right now, the story of Little Nightmares. I can already hear all the angry typing from the keyboards. So, without further ado, let's get into this. We've touched upon the relationship between Six and the lady, how possibly they might in fact be mother and daughter. We never had any concrete evidence of this, until the discovery of the two of them in the large portrait which resides in the restaurant. But there's actually another. This portrait can shed some light on the whole situation, but that picture has been deliberately hidden away by who I can only assume is the lady herself. During the kitchen chapter of the game, there is a secret room, and hidden within it is the painting. And it reveals the lady without a mask. And she might not even be human after all. Get out of here with your popular catchy music, you! It shows that she has one singular eye on her head. But can this be true? It's very possible that this just could be a metaphor for ever watching eyes. If this is true, I mean, it would make sense. There's a lot of single eye imagery in the paintings and even the doors throughout the entire mall. But before we go down the rabbit hole with this one, there's some more evidence that only came to light recently. A Reddit user by the name of Null Sharp has managed to extract the game's files, and what was discovered was rather interesting. It showed the lady's in-game model without her mask. And she looks... yeah, surprisingly normal, actually. She's a little bit of a cutie. Ooh, super kawaii. No singular eye, just a regular face. Now, because we're entering territory that the game developers don't want us to see, it's very likely they didn't intend to show us a face, and therefore didn't take any further steps to change it from a normal face into a face with a singular eye. It's also likely they knew people would do this, so they deliberately didn't add that singular eye to the model's face to throw people off the scent. But think about it, if she was smooth as a baby's bum under there, we'd be theorizing as to why she had no facial features, and speculating even harder. So, we can't really win in this situation. Not to mention that next to that portrait are paintings of what could be Six in her iconic yellow raincoat. There's no mistaking, this face is exactly the same as the one Six shares in the painting with the lady. But just for a moment, let's ignore all that and focus on evidence that's actually in the game. The painting showing her with one eye. If she does indeed have one eye, then that would mean that Six would have one eye too. And with it, her insatiable appetite, that could have been something the lady went through herself when she was a similar age to Six. And why by the end, consuming the lady, she has the same power to eat/take souls and interact with objects. We see Six crushing the lantern lights that hang in the restaurant of the Moor as she leaves, which is very similar to how the lady would slam doors, as we discussed in a previous episode. So since they can both manipulate objects around them, we can assume that the soul taking comes as a package deal. But what if Six doesn't have a singular eye? If she is indeed, like what we theorized in previous episodes, that she's beautiful, this would explain the vanity of the lady, possibly why Six was banished in the first place, the smashed mirrors, and the reason why she wears a mask. Because it can't be to hide her face from the guests. I mean, look what we're dealing with here. I'm pretty sure they wouldn't be bothered by a person with one eye. It's because she can't bear how she looks in comparison to her own daughter, Six, opting to cover her face with a mask as seen in the picture of the two of them together. Now if we go back to the pictures that Reddit user posted, we can see Six has two regular eyes. It's also possible, again, that the developers didn't want us to see this, but this isn't the only place we actually see she has two eyes. If you managed to buy the special edition of Little Nightmares, you would have got a Six figurine. And if you look at that figurine very closely, you'll see she has two eyes there too. It's possible that the developers just ripped this in-game model and then put it in a 3D software and just rendered it out and sort of manufactured it from there. But I think these two things are evidence enough to show that Six actually has a regular face. But this raises the question, if she didn't inherit her looks from her mother, where did she get them from? This leaves only one culprit, the father. If Six does have quote-unquote a normal face, she'd probably have gotten it from her father. So who's the only character we've seen with what seems to be normal features? The Hanging Man. The only character we haven't seen the face of, a deliberate choice by the creators of the game. But before we go any further, we need to understand a bit more about the Moor. Going back to the website for a quote about the ladies' quarters, if the Moor had a heart, it would have lived here. Now, does that mean the lady is a cold, callous woman? And this refers to her treatment of the granny and Six? Yeah, it's probably right there. But I think I may have misinterpreted that, assuming it was about the lady. But looking back, it's quite simple. The Moor had a heart. So it's possible that to keep the Moor alive, the lady has to feed its souls. She is even stated on the website as the one responsible for casting the spell that keeps the Moor's engine running, which is why the next chapter of the Runaways campaign is so important. The engine room. I'm betting 100% we're gonna find out if the bodies of the guests are shoved in some sort of huge furnace, or if it's the souls that keep it running. But alas, we're gonna have to wait till November until that comes out. The lady's mass genocide of guests and possibly the children wouldn't make sense unless there was a purpose for all those bodies, or souls. Now we've seen in concept art just the vast scale of the Moor. I mean, that's a whale, so this thing's bloody massive, and would therefore require a lot of bodies or soul juice to run. And this might be where our Hanging Man, or our father, comes into the story. We don't see the face of the Hanging Man, but his limbs seem rather normal. If we go back to the images our lovely Reddit user dug up, there are numerous images of what we can assume are of the Hanging Man. There's also one of the bellman, and interestingly enough, this portrait made it into the game. He was just removed. Also, the ferryman known as Fate from the comic book series makes an appearance in the same room. But we'll get back to him later, for he plays an important role, which will soon be revealed. But back to our Hanging Man. Thanks for hanging around, by the way. Now this image shows that even the in-game model doesn't reveal his face. They've been very careful about this. That or they just couldn't be asked to finish it. I mean, I don't really blame them, it's out of shot, why give yourself extra work? But it does show us that he's wearing a belt, which we can use to connect him to these two pictures. Both have the same body, but the heads are different. The one on the right looks like an optical illusion. If you squint your eyes just enough, it looks like a person looking down at their feet. And this one does indeed appear in the game, and has also been speculated to be of the granny. And at a glance, I can kind of see why. But looking at these high-resolution versions, you can see that what you thought were eyebrows and a nose were just in fact his collar and tie. Now the one on the left's head seems to be made out of intestines, or even a brain? Now we're getting somewhere. So if the lady was quote-unquote the heart of them all, could he have been the brain? And if that's the case, then it's very likely that these two could have been well acquainted with each other, even possibly close enough to have made a child. Now, whether or not it was a normal courtship is kind of hard to say. Maybe at some point he was locked away in the cellar of love. Which is also the place where we find his dead body. But however it happened, they ended up conceiving 6. As she grew older, her beauty grew more apparent to the lady and her jealousy started to show. The father, knowing what the lady was capable of, feared for 6, and the father sent her away, not to the depths of the moor, but to the mainland, getting her as far away from the lady as possible. But fate intervened. No, literally, the guy's called Fate. He was the one who brought 6 back to the moor, as without 6, the moor would have no future. The cycle would be broken. And that's where she wakes up and her journey begins. Now, it's also fair to assume that the lady herself went on to kill and consume her own mother when she was a similar age to 6, just as her mother did before her. Hence the reason why in the lady's final moments, she gives up the fight and lets 6 consume her. That in the end, she herself knew her own fate was sealed. The father found out about her return and decided to keep her down in the depths of the moor, taking care of her, making sure the lady would not find out. And that's why in relation to the game, the father and 6 are found so closely together. So that's it. I mean, we've tied everything together. It's all worked out, right?
Wrong.
We never found out what the father's role was on the moor, and thanks to the Reddit discovery, we may be able to finally put the pieces of this sick jigsaw puzzle together. There's one final picture to reveal, and that could tie this whole thing together. The face is hidden just like the hanging man's. He appears to be wearing a tie and a belt, and his hands, yeah, they seem a little stubby, but apart from that, he ticks a lot of the boxes for 6's father, our hanging man. And maybe with some fancy Photoshop editing, we can reveal the face. God damn it! Also, side note, where we find the picture of the lady in the secret room, there's a letter there. And the only other place we find a similar letter is where the hanging man hung himself, tying these two characters even more closely together. He's also wearing what appears to be a lab coat. Now, there are numerous images of children, all with the same body, but with different heads. They're all wearing the same yellow raincoat we see 6 wearing. No other children that we come across are wearing these raincoats. So if 6 is indeed his child, then these must be too. The yellow raincoat differentiating them from the children in the prison. And some of them look like they've been stitched together. One in particular is a shade of blue. And another picture, that same shade of blue is poking out from underneath the chef's mask. If the father is some sort of scientist, has he been working on the children? The chef's description reads, "They were born to be chefs." Maybe the mannequin theory was a little off, but you switch out that mannequin for a child, and all the things start working together. This explains how they're able to make noise, why there would even be toilets, and why they need to sleep. By performing some sort of operation or lobotomy, God knows what, the father may have made his own children into the perfect chefs. Easy to command and to control. But there's still 2 characters we haven't covered. The janitor and the granny. We've already established that the janitor isn't a threat to the children. His only job is to recapture any escaped children and also take care of them all. There's one children's sketch that can be found showing children holding hands with a much larger character. It's possible that they accidentally drew the arms a bit too long, but I'm gonna say that's the janitor, and evidences further his non-threatening relationship with the children. A quote from the janitor's description, "He fled the world and found the moor. And when he came aboard the moor seeking shelter, he didn't come alone. He brought the granny." Now, both these characters use their arms to catch children, and both don't seem to have any dark motives. The granny seems to have cared for the kids at one point, as covered in my previous theory video. We covered some pretty crazy theories in that one. You should definitely check it out. After this one, of course. We're almost done here, I assure you. The granny seems to kill you in the DLC, but what if she misses the children she once cared for, and when the runaway kid came along, she had to have him, inadvertently drowning you in the process? Your unwillingness to cooperate, albeit very understandable, by the end, it enrages the granny to the point where she starts destroying any platform that divides the two of you. It's Quite sad, actually.
Find it hard to tell you. Hello, my baby.
And once you leave a home of residence, who's the first Denzian of them all you run into? The janitor. He must be the one taking care of her, feeding her fish heads and scraps. Also, the only place to have a television apart from the granny's home of residence is in the janitor's chapter. Now, if the granny was indeed banished and she was the toy maker for the children, it would make sense as to why the janitor has a room filled with her toys, the toys that she made. The janitor misses her. And as he's able to move around the moor so freely, he's been collecting these in some sort of shrine or memorial. Also, he likes spoons.
I like rusty spoons.
I also forgot to mention that the granny may have been a caretaker for the lady and the other inhabitants at one point or another. The only place we see a laundry machine is in her level, and it just so happens in the very same scene that's when we get our first encounter with the granny. But this still doesn't explain why the granny was banished in the first place. If she had a vital role to play in the moor, then she would have had to have done something incredibly bad to have been banished like this. What if the hanging man, Six's father, didn't commit suicide and instead was murdered? For someone who chops and malforms children on a regular basis, why would sending Six away push him over the edge? To me, it doesn't add up. What if his suicide was a setup? If you look at the crime scene, there's something that doesn't add up. The chair. It's far too small for him to have stood on. And if he did kill himself on this chair, then why was it right underneath him? Surely it would have been kicked away. But who would have a motive for killing him though? And what would be the punishment? You've already guessed it before me. Banished to decay and rage. The granny. If we take a look at this picture, it's safe to assume that maybe the janitor at one point had eyes. There's also what seems to be a younger image of the janitor that for ratings reason wasn't used. And comparing these side by side, it's almost undisputable that has to be the janitor maybe some time ago. So if he once had eyes, what happened? The janitor had his eyes torn off, or in this case, his eyes folded up. It's quite obvious the children knew the janitor was blind, as most of the sketches that are drawn of the janitor scribble over his eyes. And if you look closely, these pictures tell a story. The one on the left shows the janitor with a sad face, blood covering his head, and it's also been scribbled out. So when the janitor had his eyes gouged out or his face pulled down, it looked like it hurt. And not only did that happen, but it also appears that the janitor had multiple limbs. Again, just like the face, his limbs have been all scribbled out except for the two at the top. His two remaining arms. The father was the one to do this. His motives were quite simple, really. He didn't want anyone to know what he was doing.
Blind ones that couldn't see.
If the janitor found out that he was doing this to the children, surely he would have had something to say about it, and something might have happened. But there was one being the father didn't count on. The granny. If we're to assume the father didn't know about the granny, then he thought he might have had it all covered. However, the granny found out, and in her rage did what she had to do to end the children's suffering. But seeing as the lady kind of has eyes everywhere, she didn't get away with it. If she is able to access the doors that have the eye shape on it, then she would have seen the setup taking place and banished the granny down to the depths of the moor. Now, the lady might have known that Six was sent away, and that's the reason why in the comic book we have all these different characters, all with one thing in common. They're hiding their face with some sort of clothing or material. It's possible the lady might have hired Fate to bring back any children that looked like Six. If you're to believe that, of course. But with the father removed, Six was left alone. And without her father's watch and care, Six began a hungry path to find her mother and eventually consume her, completing the cycle and becoming the new head of the moor. But But hey, yeah, I know we did this one time before, but doesn't mean I can't do it another time. Thanks for watching. Well, there you have it. I tried tying together as much of the story and plot points together as I could in a single linear story. So, in doing so, I probably missed a fair bit, of course. If you have your own theories or know something I've missed, leave them in the comments below. I love reading them. A big shout out to the person who commented in my previous theory video, username, you couldn't have made that easier, for his massive wall of text, which really helped me place the building blocks for this theory. And if this video hasn't quenched your appetite enough for Little Nightmares, here's the playlist to my Little Nightmares playthrough and more theory videos. You should go watch them. They're all very good. You guys are awesome. I love reading your comments. And until next time, when the next DLC drops, and inevitably I make another theory video, I'll see you later. Bye.